We continue our series of conversations with all 17 candidates on the ballot for Denver mayor with State Senator Chris Hansen. Welcome back to Next.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. Thanks for having me.
So you've said that you pledge to forcibly clear homeless encampments in the city of Denver, but that you won't arrest people for just violating the urban camping ban. That sounds a lot like the situation that we have now. So how does your plan differ from the status quo?
Well, yeah, I think it's very different, Kyle. I mean, first of all, my plan involves a complete audit of how we're spending the money. And this is something I'm really trying to highlight with the voters because we're spending $250 million this year and seeing a negative result. So we need an immediate audit of how the city is spending money to get better results. Something I pioneered at the state level on the Joint Budget Committee is evidence-based budgeting. And I think that's exactly the approach we need to bring to this particular problem. But to your point about the encampments, I am very clear with the voters from day one of my campaign that we cannot have open camping and hope to be successful in Denver. But let's be clear, arresting somebody for standing on the sidewalk is unconstitutional. So I think that's a big difference between me and some of the other campaigns is there are very clear lines of enforcement. And that's where I want to see us do different from the status quo. Right now, we're seeing encampments within blocks of where we're sitting that have been there for weeks and months. So we don't have clear enforcement right now, and that is something that I want to be very clear with the voters of how I would be different.
So folks could be arrested for violating the urban camping ban. They typically are not now, but they could be because that would be a violation of the law. We've got candidates like Kelly Brough and Kwame Spearman and Trini Rodriguez who have suggested doing that. Do you think that that's morally the right thing to do, to arrest people if they're in violation of the urban camping ban?
Well, I think when we move in and reduce an encampment or to clear an encampment, there needs to be an offer of services. That's an important part of what came from the federal court order for the city of Denver. And I absolutely plan to use that approach. But I think to say that you're immediately going to be under arrest, does not lead to a chance to connect somebody to services, and that's really what they need. And so I want to be very clear in the enforcement. But if somebody refuses services and is standing on the sidewalk, is not trespassing, there's no other offense that's involved, then really the last option is an involuntary hold. And we have a very clear legal procedure for that, right? The police can say this person is having a mental health crisis or an addiction crisis and bring them in front of a judge, and you have a hold and a chance for review. And it meets the constitutional protections that we enjoy as U.S. citizens. That is the procedure, and that's exactly what I plan to do as mayor.
Do you get a sense of what percentage of the folks living in encampments are interested in an offer of shelter?
Yeah, I've talked to lots of nonprofit leaders in this space and public leaders in this space. I typically am told that in their experience that it's around 10% that are not, but that the vast majority are. And I think it's incumbent on us to really approach the problem with that approach, to make sure that we're immediately giving people options. Some folks are going to say no, and that is part of the complexity of this problem, but the vast majority are looking for help.
When you hear other folks in the race make some pretty big promises about this issue, Kelly Brough saying she's going to end unsanctioned camping in a year, Mike Johnson saying that he'll make Denver the first major city in America to end homelessness within one term. When you hear those big promises, what do you think?
Well, I think it's overpromising. I am a realist. I'm known at the Capitol of being very pragmatic in the way I try to approach tough policy discussions, and I think I've done the same thing with the Denver voters this time around. The Denver voters are smart. They know when somebody's overpromising. We can make massive progress in this issue, but to say I'm going to end it in a year would be unrealistic, and the Denver voters know that. And so I've really been trying to look at other cities like San Antonio that have made great progress. They've cut it in half in 2 years. We can do that in Denver, and there's great templates, great models around the country like San Antonio that have shown success. That's what we need to do in Denver, and that's what I've proposed to the voters. San Antonio brought forward a very clear set of steps. First of all, no open camping, create a one-stop shop that people can come and get help when they need it, and be very clear in providing stable services, stable housing with wraparound services. And we're often missing that in Denver because the only long-term success we're seeing, and San Antonio I think proves this, is when you get housing stabilized and then you have wraparound treatment on mental health and addiction. That shows long-term success. Just housing is a short-term solution. We have to have those services.
Would sobriety be a requirement to get into that housing?
It's a great question. This is something I spent a lot of time talking to the Salvation Army about. They have recently changed their approach. They had what is referred to as high barrier versus low barrier. And sobriety is one of those barriers. And what they found working with families experiencing homelessness is that if they maintained a high barrier policy all the time, very little success. Because people make mistakes, people mess up, people backtrack. But when they went to a lower barrier approach and gave people second and third chances and helped stabilize families, get the kids back into school, now they saw a path to 90% permanent placement. So I think that is a much better way to help people.
When you talk about the idea of auditing homeless spending, you get a lot of cheers from conservatives who think that there's malfeasance in the homeless spending and that your suggestion of an audit says that you think that there's something sketchy going on in there. And they'll use terms like the homeless industrial complex. They think people are getting rich off of homeless services. Do you think that's what's going on?
People are not getting rich off homeless services. When I say audit, I'm talking about having the budget match the most effective programs, and where we're not seeing success, quickly cut those programs. And unfortunately, we've got examples of that in Denver, and I've heard about many of them from neighborhood groups and talking to nonprofit leaders, places where we're not seeing success. Let's cut those.
Let's talk about those. What are they?
Yeah. Well, I was visiting the Curtis Park neighborhood last week, and I had a chance to talk with community leaders there, and they point to some of the programs that that are very short-term in nature, that are kind of, the baling wire and duct tape, as you might refer to them on the farm, where you're seeing a kind of an a la carte approach, and somebody shows up and they get a short-term service, and then they go back and start camping again and repeat the cycle over and over again. That's a great example of what could be thousands of dollars of spending on some short-term services that sees no long-term results. And I think that's the kind of approach we need to take to the audit and make sure next year's budget, my next budget, will reflect progress.
Your newest ad shows you standing in front of an enormous whiteboard on which the number $250 million is written. That's the amount that you're saying the city's going to spend on homeless services this year. And the suggestion, with the big number behind you, is that that amount is excessive. Do you think that that number is excessive, or do you just want to redirect the money into more effective programs?
Kyle, I'm open to both conclusions. And what I think am noticing in the parts that I've been able to look at from the outside is that there's probably both happening. Programs where we need to be more effective and shift, but also places where we can make some cuts. Keep in mind, the $25 million is what we were spending just a few years ago. Now it's $250 million, so 10x spending, but seeing the homelessness crisis get worse in the city. So there is no doubt there are places where we can tighten the belt and shift. And I think that's the key to the audit.
So a lot of the candidates for mayor kind of echo the same themes when it comes to public safety and crime. Everybody loves the STAR program. They want to expand the STAR program. Better training for DPD officers so that we don't have as many use of force lawsuits and things like that. A lot of candidates want to hire officers back up to the full authorized force strength. How is your public safety plan different from other candidates in the race?
Well, I would start with being endorsed by the sheriffs. I've had lengthy conversations with the sheriff's officers and the union that represents them, the Teamsters. They have endorsed me in this race, and I think the reason they endorsed me is because I had a clear plan to reinvest and rebuild the public safety department. I think it's important for your viewers to know that right now at the county jail that the sheriff's office runs, we are down 40% on the head count on the frontline officers. On the police side, it's almost 20%. And that leads to slower response times. That leads to potential safety issues inside the jail. A number of ways that public safety is not functioning at the level that the city deserves. And so I've really tried to emphasize rebuilding and reinvesting in the department as the #1 priority for the next mayor. That's what I want to deliver, a world-class public safety department that is well-resourced, well-trained, highly accountable as part of that mix. That's what I think Denver deserves, and I think it's the reason I earned the endorsement of the sheriffs.
Forgive me, because this is not my area of expertise. Are there two unions that represent employees at the sheriff's office?
Well, I believe that all the officers are represented by the Teamsters.
By one. Okay.
Separate for the police department, of course.
Obviously, yes. Yeah. Police union would be separate. Okay. You're running an ad that promises a crackdown on homelessness and crime. And 7 of the 8 people depicted in the ad are homeless or criminals or people of color. And there are Black and Latino candidates in the race, people who call you a friend and a colleague, who have said that you had a blind spot on this, whether you meant to or not, that sends a derogatory message about their community. And you dismiss their concerns as just politics. Why?
Well, look, that was a coordinated political attack. That happens in politics. I get that. I guess I disagree with the premise. We took news footage from Channel 9 to try to really make sure that the voters of Denver know that this is where we want to focus. Because I believe the #1 issues in this race are public safety and how we address the homelessness crisis. I'm hearing that all over town in neighborhood after neighborhood. These are the top priorities. So we wanted to quickly get people's attention and then really clearly communicate, here's how we want to approach the solutions. I think that's fundamentally what campaigns are about, getting your best ideas in front of the voters, making sure they understand how you would tackle the most important issues in the city, and that's what we're trying to do with that ad. So look, it's a fair discussion, but we're going to stay really focused on communicating those solutions to the voters.
So you said it was a coordinated political attack. So you don't think that their concerns are genuine when they say, hey, listen, when you put up an ad that shows a bunch of people of color committing crimes or being homeless, that perpetuates stereotypes?
Well, look, I listen carefully to those criticisms. I always take criticism seriously. I've talked with scores of people, since the debate that we had, and I take that on and listen to it very carefully. But we again took some news footage. It had a mix of different folks in that news footage, and it was all as a way to really make sure we're focusing in on the most important issues in town. And that's what I'll continue to do in this campaign.
So just to clarify, this is really in the weeds, but I want to be sure that we're accurate about it. You said that the footage was taken from 9 News. There are 3 images in the footage. The second image of one man attacking another on a sidewalk, I don't believe has ever been on our air. There's a third image of somebody stealing off a porch. I don't believe that's ever been on our air.
No, just one of
it's the first image, which is people pushing carts outside of a park. That's the image.
That was one of the pieces
okay.
of the news.
That was the only one that I couldn't identify when I looked at it. So I appreciate you clearing that up.
Yeah.
So a broader question kind of on this same issue, but in terms of your leadership style. The criticism about this ad didn't just come from people who are opposed to your stance on crime and homelessness. It really kind of came from candidates across the ideological spectrum. I mean, Kwame Spearman, who has pretty much the same stance as you on crime and homelessness, said that your ad misrepresents who's on the streets and who's committing crime. How is it possible for people to convince you that you've made an error? If people who are friends and colleagues saying, hey, I know you didn't mean to do this, but you did. If that's not the right approach to convince Mayor Chris Hansen that he's made an error, what's the right approach?
Well, look, I have made many mistakes in my life. I certainly don't stand before you today saying, that I don't make mistakes. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that, we used some news footage. It had a very, lots of different scenes in those first few seconds to get people's attention, to make sure that folks know that we're trying to focus in on public safety and a response to the homelessness crisis. In a debate situation, right, there's going to be attacks lobbed. I'm trying my best to really run an ideas-based, solution-oriented campaign. I'm going to continue to do that. I mean, my second ad has now been released. We focus in on the discussion we just had around how to better spend the resources we have to tackle this crisis. And that's what I'm going to continue to do with the voters.
Your background involves a lot of energy work, a lot of work on the environment. I want to talk about that. The challenge from Denver's 2020 Climate Action Task Force is to reach net zero emissions as a community by 2040. And a significant part of that would be electrifying large buildings so that they're less reliant on natural gas.
Yeah.
Does that goal seem doable to you? And how do you pursue that goal without getting lost in the weeds over things like a debate over whether we're going to ban gas stoves from homes and things like that?
Yeah. Well, look, Kyle, this is a really important debate. I mean, the response of Denver, of Colorado to climate change, an existential threat to our very civilization, is something that I take very seriously. It is the reason I ran for public office, because I wanted to see Colorado be a climate leader. And I believe after my 7 years in the legislature, that's exactly what I've helped deliver for the state. And I want to bring that expertise to the city. I think the debate about banning stoves is the wrong debate. What we really need to do is take advantage of this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that we have in Denver because of the federal, the state, and the local incentives that are in place. We have a multi-billion-dollar opportunity to drastically improve our environmental performance in Denver. And I believe I am the candidate who has a proven track record of being able to deliver fast progress on that. And electrifying city buildings, electrifying the city fleet, helping commercial and residential offices and office buildings switch over to electric heating, cooling, switching over to electric vehicles, right? These are all the things the city can supercharge, no pun intended. And if we do it right, it's worth billions of dollars of investment. It's worth tens of thousands of great green jobs. And we put Denver as the leader in the nation of being the greenest city in the country. And you think about the brown cloud that hangs over our head. Not only do we get great progress on the greenhouse gas side, but we also drastically improve environmental quality of local air. And we can walk out, on a winter day and see the brown cloud. We are in severe non-attainment with the EPA. We have to make rapid progress on this, and I believe my expertise would be a way to really help supercharge that at the city level.
Understand that there's some federal funds that are available, but can Denver accomplish its climate goals without increasing revenues through additional layers of taxation?
Yeah, I want to be clear. We are at the very max of where we should be with sales tax. Sales tax is deeply regressive. I don't believe we need new sales taxes in Denver. It's great that the voters said yes to this $45 million fund that helps us do the decarbonization work. It's played out in things like vouchers for e-bikes up to this point and some other programs. I really try to take the approach at the Capitol, again, of using evidence to go after the quickest, cheapest solutions first before you chase the things that are way more expensive and less effective. That's exactly what I want to do with CASR, the department of the city. And so electrification of the city buildings, for example, massive payoff. And the great news is, and I'm sure your viewers have recently opened their Excel utility bills, gas prices have been sky high. Many of us paying double what we paid just a few months ago on our utility bills. Think about the city's utility bills, tens of millions of dollars. If you could shave that by 20, 30, 40% with electrification, now we have tons of money left over for things like snow plowing and better services. So this is a huge opportunity for the city.
So in our closing minutes, I was going to let you talk about snow plowing. You like to talk about snow plowing. We like to talk about snow plowing on next. Let's talk about snow plowing. All right. We both grew up in rural areas where if they didn't plow, you couldn't get anywhere.
Correct.
Denver takes the approach of, well, just let the sun take care of the side streets. And sometimes it's a day or two. This winter, it's been a month or two. How do you assess our current snow removal programs, and what would you really do to change them?
Yeah, Kyle, it's a really important question. And I think, the storm we had right after Christmas, unfortunately, was one of these situations where it was heavy and wet, and we didn't have warm weather follow it right away. And so the side streets were untouched on December 28th, 29th, and 30th as folks were on vacation. And then we come back in early January, and the side streets are a total mess. And what I found out when I talked to Dottie, the department in the city that's responsible for it, is that we're still making snowplow plans based on climate data from 20 years ago. So we have to update these plans. Denver spends about $3 million a year on snowplowing. Most other major cities, like Minneapolis, where different sort of weather pattern, but they're spending $13, $14 million a year, very similar size. So Denver's got to update our plan. We've got to be ready for these types of storms because climate change means we get wetter, heavier snows earlier in the season, and the solar plowing, as the city calls it, it's not going to be effective. And unfortunately, the December storm proved it.
But part of our snow mitigation plan is based on the fact that you don't want a ton of diesel traffic out there contributing to the brown cloud. You don't want to put a ton of particulates down. They get kicked up by the vehicles and end up in the brown cloud. So how is an environmentally focused mayor going to improve snow plowing without making that worse?
Yeah, well, here's the great news. When you plow right after a storm, you drastically reduce the amount of sand and grit that you need on the roads. That is the biggest cause for additional air pollution because as the cars ride over it, grinds it up, little tiny particles, and then they fly into the air and they unfortunately join the rest of the air pollution. So if we plow in an immediate and responsive way, it actually reduces the amount of need for sand and grit and improves our air quality.
We're going to leave it there with the conversation that we've both wanted to have for months. Chris Hansen, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Kyle.